Morning, everyone. Robert Gehorsam and I both attended Grinnell College out in Iowa, although not at the same time. So we've gotten to know each other subsequently through alumni connections. He majored in both religious studies and English literature, double major. He spent much of his career as an executive in large companies in the gaming and digital media industry. For those of us in the room who are geezers, which is pretty much everyone, the video gaming industry is big business, over double the size of Hollywood and 10 times the size of the music industry. So even though probably there's maybe 2 or 3 gamers in this whole room, it's a big deal. And Robert was in that business. He currently advises investment funds and research funds on climate. And he's a traditional bi-coastal guy. He spends half his time in New York and half his time in LA. So 2 years ago, Robert and 300 collaborators, you can do better than that, published the Carbon Almanac, and he's here today to talk about the book and the process of creating it with a herd of authors.
Well, thanks, Mitch. You actually mentioned some of the things that I was going to say, which is that we went to the same school but missed each other, but I think 2 or 3 months, right? Something like that. But it's been a pleasure to get to know you since. And Joel, thanks for your help in getting everything set up. Okay. So I'm here today to talk about this book called the Carbon Almanac. And not so much the content. I think I'm hopeful that most of you here are aware that our climate is changing and changing because of the effects of human activity, and it's not changing for the better, at least from a human perspective. People often, when they're climate activists, talk about saving the planet. I can assure you the planet does not need saving. We need to save ourselves as a result of this activity. So I'm not going to go into detail about greenhouse gas emissions and the effect of deforestation and all that. I'm going to talk about the human response to what we've done. And so this is the artwork of the cover. And the Carbon Almanac was an idea that was conceived by a close friend of mine and a best-selling author of almost 24 works, named Seth Godin. Some of you may be familiar with his work. And he and I were getting together one day in the summer of 2021. And let's see, I have to click, right? Yeah, here we go. Over a wonderful Middle Eastern lunch, which included some smoky baba ganoush. I'm sure, when I sent the slides, Mitch said, there are some of these I don't understand. I'm sure you're going to explain. I'm sure this bowl of baba ganoush was one of them. So we were just catching up on life in general, and Seth, as he often does, says, I'm done with publishing, I'm done with books, I don't want to do anything else in that world ever again. It's like, here, have another pita bread, let's keep talking. And soon what emerged was we got into a discussion about, well, the only thing that really matters these days is carbon. Carbon being a shorthand for climate. And the more we talked about it, just sort of not particularly having an idea in mind, the more it led me to say, the problem is not, the problem about solving the climate change problem is not science, and it's not technology, and it's not the availability of capital or expertise. All these things we have in abundance in the world relative to this problem. The thing we don't seem to have is the will to do something. And that is at the individual level, it is at the local level, it is at the national level, it is at the global level. We always have reasons not to take action. And that's the mystery. It's one of the deepest mysteries that faces us today is how, in the face of pretty much incontrovertible facts, we don't take this action. So that was a really fun lunch. The very opposite of the jokes, a little closer to the political peril that we were talking about earlier. And I flew back to LA and was thinking about it, and just continued to think about it. And then you start to look at what's going on in the world. And we originally talked about climate change as global warming. We certainly see it. I live in Los Angeles, and so every summer we have to deal with the effects of this nearby. But it never quite gets to the really, never really gets into our neighborhoods, per se, other people perhaps. But global warming isn't the only thing the climate is doing. If you're in Bangladesh and other coastal places, it looks different. It's flooding. For some reason, Asheville, North Carolina in the mountains, felt the full impact this year of Hurricane Helene. And so it manifests in a lot of different forms. I should point out, by the way, here, that 60% of humanity lives in what are essentially coastal or maritime or oceanic regions that are going to be affected by rising sea level or volatile climate. It's also going to affect places that are not on the coasts. And we were talking about AI a little earlier. This is a ChatGPT generated image. But what prompted that image was a conversation that I had about 15 years ago with an official of the Bureau of Land Management at a conference I was at for reasons I can't even remember. And he said, what we're really concerned about these days is that the kinds of fires we see in California and Oregon and Washington are now going to start to appear in the Midwest. And it doesn't take much to realize that the firefighting infrastructure that exists on the West Coast does not exist in the Midwest. The ability to marshal those resources, the incredible bravery and expertise of these individuals. It doesn't exist, and there's no political will to make it exist. And so imagine, I'm not even going to say thousands of acres, but countless square miles of corn, of wheat, of soybeans, of the equivalent of a Ukraine going up in smoke. That is a risk that is going to start to happen. And it is not just the destruction of land, but the economic calamities. All of these things are facing us. It's a probabilistic thing. We don't know exactly where. We don't know exactly when. We don't even know exactly what, but it's going to be something like that. So these are some cheery thoughts to get you started for today. So we decided, I got an email from my friend in September. He said, hey, how'd you like to work on a book with me? We have a publishing deal with Viking Penguin to do this book. And the insight that Seth had was that in all of the discourse that we have about climate, there was nothing that was plain spoken. We have big books by Al Gore, by Bill Gates, by others. We have scientific journals, and we have the politics. The idea that climate is a politicized topic is a mystery to me, but it is. But there was nothing that could explain it simply. And that was really important because 70% of the American population believes in the fact of anthropogenic climate change, that the climate is changing and humanity is the dominant, almost exclusive cause of it. But they don't know what to do about it. And they don't know how to talk about it. And they kind of feel, well, this is a bigger thing than just me. I recycle, what else do I need to do? And so, well, first thing is recycling doesn't do anything. It's a complete and utter scam is not quite the word, but it's a bit of virtue signaling that does nothing for the actual problem. So we got this book contract, and in September of 2021. And as Mitch said, and as I'll also get into, all of a sudden 300 people were volunteering to work on this book and some other projects associated with the book. We didn't know each other. We weren't experts in much of anything. I was one of the few people who had a publishing background. I actually started my career before games in book publishing. And we were in 42 different countries. So how do you do this? And if any of you ever written a book or published a book or been involved in it, you know that it takes a while. And this is a project that should have taken 18 months to 2 years. We're going to get back to that in a little bit. So we had to do a lot of upfront work on like, what's the position? Where are we going to be? And this page from the book is a very typical page. It was an almanac, by the way. That's the key part. Think about the Information Please Almanac or the Whole Earth Catalog back in the late 60s. Those were our inspirations. So everything was like 2 pages. We always had illustrations, infographics, footnotes, citations. This wasn't a bunch of op-ed pieces. And we came across the work of, I think it's Charles, let me see if I can even remember the names. It's Norman Borlaug and William Vogt were the 2 key people here, who think of them as the wizard and the prophet. So Borlaug, I think, was sort of one of the inventors or pioneers of industrial agriculture, better or worse. And Vogt was really about sort of Malthus was right, we need to reduce our footprint on the planet. And these are still ongoing tensions in all of the debate. But one thing you can't do is stick your head in the sand. And so the purpose of our book was to get people's heads out of the sand and to give them some hope that they could do something. So just a reminder, 300 contributors, not just authors. In fact, only about 3 dozen of us actually wrote the books, but people edited, people researched, people fact-checked, they designed, they illustrated, and we self-organized. This was the amazing part. No one was in charge. And as I said, 42 countries, et cetera, et cetera. So those 18 months didn't happen. We delivered, oh, and by the way, these really were the backgrounds of people, okay? So we delivered finished, production-ready digital files to the publisher in 5 months. So you might say, well, if it had been a single author, right, could imagine them working nonstop and they're going to get it done. How did 300 people coordinate, collaborate, without hierarchy, without organization? Okay. And I don't have an answer for that, except there seemed to be 2 factors that contributed. One was we were all volunteers. We took the advance payment from Viking Penguin and used it in other ways to further our goals. The topic, I mean, to call it a topic actually is to understate it. The mission, the purpose of what we were doing united us in getting this done. It really was a life-changing kind of experience, I think, for everybody involved. I wrote, well, reminder, as Mitch said, religious studies, graduate, classics, English literature, not atmospheric physics, not ocean biology. I wrote a couple of scientific pieces. The one that I wrote that I was in science was an exploration of what would happen if the Gulf Stream stopped being the Gulf Stream. It's a possibility. It's not a very happy scenario. We would be bundled up in multiple layers of parkas at this point. 20% of the world's fisheries would disappear. Really, the East Coast would look like Siberia and Western Europe the same. So I wrote that, but the pieces I wrote that were most inspiring were about human action. And in particular, there were 2 articles that I dove into, which were about youth-led class action suits that were being brought against governments to stop basically mining, drilling, fossil fuel, carbon emitting actions. And the suits were brought on the basis of claiming that governments were failing in their duty of care to the future. Now, you think about adolescence, maybe you don't want to think about it, the brains of adolescents don't think far into the future, right? They're very much in the present. It should fall to us as the elders to be custodians of that, but we haven't collectively, and it was inspiring to see that kids all around the world are doing this. And so they have been winning class action suits around the world, except in the United States. And the reasons have been somewhat technical, not ideological. We'll still make progress, but there's a large barrier ahead. And so those were great. And then another piece that I wrote, I talked about the illusion of recycling, but one thing that's not an illusion is deciding where you bank. So ever since the Paris Treaty on Climate was signed in 2015, the 4 major banks, with apologies to anyone who's had long careers at Chase, Citi, et cetera, have invested or loaned about $1.4 trillion to the fossil fuel industry. If you do not have your checking and savings deposits and other assets in those banks, they cannot make those loans. One of the hardest things to do is if you have had your personal money in those banks for 10, 20, 30 years, the psychological inertia to make a move is overwhelming, and I will tell you, I experienced that personally. And it's like a metaphor for how hard behavior change is to have impact. So we didn't just write a book, and a reminder again, no one was an expert. And so we early on, I forget who it was, someone said, you know what, don't worry that you don't know about, the dissipation rates of methane or things like that. Everybody can write page 19, and that became our little slogan. And it was true, it was true. These are sample pages, again, of some of the scientific work. But we didn't just deliver a book. We also delivered a kid's book, a teacher's guide, 4 podcast series, a LinkedIn learning course. We, not the publisher, sold the international rights to 7 different countries, translated in 7 different languages, and a pretty rich website, which you can all see. And we had an arrangement with Getty Images. They provided us with dozens of relevant photos for a digital photo book, which I would still love to have as a coffee table book to really depress people who come over. This is not a depressing photo, but if we don't do something about our oceans, this will just be an illusion at this point. I'm going to come back to the importance of oceans in a little bit. Another set of pages that shows you how quick and accessible this was for so many people. And we heard over and over and over again that now they understood why climate matters. It's easy if you're in this area, or if just read, to not realize how many people don't know we have a problem. I experienced this explaining to my cousin in Florida why she probably should not stay in Florida. And now we see the reasons. And so in sum, right, this became an incredible model of what you would call collective action, self-organizing, and collective intelligence. I think the quality of the work, based on what we have heard back from lots of people, was a form of what you'd call collective intelligence. The sum was greater than the parts, and the diversity of people involved contributed to that. So any of you, if you have time and desire, can be involved. It's actually what we learned was that local action is incredibly compelling. I gave a talk in Long Beach, California, and to see what the government had done, what the schools had done to address carbon emissions and other sustainability things were really impressive. Sort of in sum for this, this is a great phrase, right? We have to do something. There's no planet B, right? Some people may say we're going to get to Mars, but 10 people are going to get to Mars. So we really have to take action. The IPCC goal, the international goal of limiting temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius by, is it 2050? No one's pretending that's doable anymore. We're now at 2.5 degrees. So I'm going to start to, and we're not going to feel it as much here. Other parts of the world are going to feel it. I'm going to get to that in a second. We published the book, became a bestseller across multiple Amazon categories. It still might be. And we, as I said, did a lot of outreach. Our sales strategy was to work with companies and nonprofit organizations who had an interest in this for educating their employees, their customers, other constituents, and we sold thousands and thousands of copies that way. The book is used as a textbook, actually, at our alma mater in several courses, which I'm thrilled about. I didn't do anything about it. Everything changed for the people involved, and hopefully everything has started to change for people we've impacted. As I said, came to be seen as experts, which was pretty strange for some of us. And so I'll make this, try to make this quick here. So it was sort of a surprise, but sort of not a surprise when I got this text message back in June, which basically said from a friend of mine, hey, want to come to Kwajalein next summer for a Greenpeace event? And maybe some of you or all of you know where Kwajalein is and what Kwajalein is known for. So, but if not, we're going to review it for a second. Needless to say, I told him I got to check my calendar. I think I have a lunch meeting that day. I don't know. So apparently I'm going. So it's like somewhere around that arrow. So Kwajalein is part of the Marshall Islands, which is an independent island nation in what's called a compact of free association with the United States. Its relationship with the United States is complex. We conducted 67 thermonuclear tests in one of the atolls there. We denied for decades that the health problems of the Marshallese on the northern side of the Kwajalein Atoll could possibly be related to those 67 thermonuclear tests. Finally, Greenpeace, 40 years ago, evacuated islanders from some of these tiny islands up on the northern side of the atoll. Kwajalein Island anchors, so to speak, the entire atoll, which is the largest in the world, I believe, on the southern end. It's the largest island, and, right, yeah, this doesn't show, but, well, there's the whole atoll, you might be able to see. How big is Kwajalein Island? That's the runway at the bottom. United has daily flights. Why? Because that is a Air Force runway, US Air Force runway. And at the tip, down here, are a series of domes. And these are some of those sensitive military sites the US has. These track rocket and missile launches through the entire Pacific region, whether it's ours or North Korea's or whoever's. And we also do rocket launches from sites all around here. So it's pretty important, but it's gonna go away in 20 years. And why? Well, obviously climate related. And the particulars of it are sea level rise, more than volatile and cyclones and things like that. Those will be there, but it's really the sea level rise. So in 20 years, the islands, the Marshall Islands in total, are going to lose their capacity to have fresh water. And the Marshallese, of whom there are 42,000, are going to have to leave their home of 3,000 years. And they are leaving because of human activity in the rest of in the developed world, which has caused the kinds of changes that are affecting it. And so I've been asked to show up and help on education, help on possibly some other outreach, and some fundraising for a series of activities that my friend who texted me, he's the climate security advisor to the president there, wants to undertake to prepare the islanders for their departure. So this isn't the first time a society has known its end was coming, and end is not the death of the individuals, it's the death of their home. It's not the first time, but it will be the first time that we can record how it happened, develop lessons learned, and share those lessons with the 60% of humanity that is facing a similar fate in islands and along coasts all around the world. Not just in the developing world, but in the developed world as well. And with that cheerful, slightly hopeful bit, that's the conclusion of my talk, so thank you very much.
Anyone with questions, and I'm sure there are many, please come up.
Good.
I wanted to mention something to all of you and all of us that live in New Jersey. One of the things about, I'm sorry, your name is Robert, that Robert mentioned is sea level rise. In New Jersey alone, the 100-year floodplain zone, the 250-year floodplain zone, and the 500-year floodplain zone have been changed in a lot of our shore towns. Many of the, to give you an example, the floodplain line in an area that I live sometimes has gone from a 100-year floodplain zone to a 500-year floodplain zone in the middle of the street. So those of you who live in New Jersey should recognize that. Also, people who live around the Great Swamp. Anybody live around the Great Swamp? That's going to change. Your insurance is going to be affected by that. And once you are notified of those floodplain zones, you're going to have to either increase your insurance, and our friends in the insurance industry, I know there are a lot of you here. None of you are working still, but that's significantly changed. And Robert, you might want to talk about that. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I will say, living in Los Angeles, in the Hollywood Hills, people can no longer, it's not universally true, but people can increasingly are unable to get home insurance. It's hard to imagine what the cascading effect of not being able to get insurance is going to be, but we're seeing it about, I don't know, 2% of homes are no longer insurable just in the more well-to-do neighborhoods in Los Angeles. So it's a huge, so it's the kind of crisis that's emblematic of climate in general, and that the best analogy, which I wanted to mention earlier, is the one of the frog slowly boiling in water, right? You just don't respond till it's too late because we're just not activated enough. Anyway, thank you for that.
Thank you. That was a very pessimistic but very interesting presentation. Thank you very much. I was very interested in your brief comment on the youth suing the government. And I remember Greta Thunberg, this young Swedish activist that made the news quite a few times. So my question is, number one, what happened to her? And also, why don't we have suits in this country? You said it's mostly all over the world that we have those suits. So can you elaborate a little more on that subject? Thank you.
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about the latter one. I can't speak to Greta Thunberg. She's moved on to some other political outrages that are not relevant to climate. The movement is much, much larger than her alone. So the suit, whose name, Juliana versus the US government, that's the name of the lawsuit. was brought to the Ninth Circuit, which is sort of the Northern California Circuit Court, which is, you might imagine, fairly liberal in its general orientation, and it was thrown out on standing. So the judge said that the plaintiffs did not have a legal basis to bring the suit in the first place. And in his remarks, the judge said, keep trying. So it's been going on for years, now 5 years, something like that. So that's why it was thrown out, but it's not over yet.
What about the other countries?
So the other countries, Australia, Germany, I think New Zealand, I mean, sort of the developed world countries, they all, as far as I can recall, brought successful suits to force the government to deny mining, drilling, and similar licenses to companies. Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it. I have a question on a sub-issue that you mentioned, but I have to say I'm involved in it. You said I can't believe your phrase that essentially recycling is more or less a waste of time. And in my retirement, one of the things I've picked up is working with recycling on a local basis pretty intensely. And I have to say, I've come to the same conclusion. And speaking about lawsuits, I'm aware that I think states including California, are suing plastic companies, saying that they should stop the entire recycling system that you may or may not be familiar with ones and fives and this paper, not that paper, and saying it's a total fraud and a waste of time and isn't doing anything at all. The Columbia School of Journalism did a study where they kicked in and bought electronic devices, and attached it to recycling. And about 90% of everything that's placed in recycling in New York ended up in dumps. Yeah. So I was wondering, do you think it's a total waste of time, like I'm afraid I do, and I'm a member of a green team?
By the way, he was in Westfield. He grew up in
I grew up in Westfield, so. Yeah, it seems to be a waste of time. I mean, recycling doesn't take a lot of personal time for any of us. So maybe the cost of getting that I think the number is 94% of the recycled stuff doesn't get recycled. So is the 20 minutes a week you spend putting stuff in different bins, maybe, but the danger is that it makes you feel you've actually done something when you could be actually doing something else. So that's the issue. And speaking of the landfills, so we're a powerful country that can do a lot of things and bend others to our will. And so for years, we sort of removed the problem from our site, and China in particular took our landfill, took all those piles of plastic. And in the last 5-10 years, they've said, no more. So the stuff gets dumped in the ocean, and plastics in the ocean are a whole thing. You could do a whole talk here about plastics in the ocean and the danger that represents. So one thing I want to say is I know this is inherently a pessimistic topic, but it doesn't mean we're doomed. There's a lot of potential. We have unleashed, in part because of the IRA, an incredible amount of innovation in technology and other areas that actually can have an effect if we can get them out into the world. So just want to say, all's not lost. It's not going to be easy.
Online.
Well, thank you for an interesting talk. This past week, I saw an article with the title, Food from Thin Air. And it mentioned that there are a bunch of startup companies, some of them funded by DARPA, that are attempting to create feedstocks by you just using the carbon in the atmosphere and the water in the atmosphere and the other gases in the atmosphere and producing feedstocks. Are these good investments? And do you think this is a worthwhile area?
I'm not here to give investment advice. I will say, and I was an advisor to DARPA for 8 years, 9 years, and saw, incredible risk-taking and imagination going on there. Can you all hear me? Okay. All right. So I don't know if those specific things are going to happen or not. I will say, and I'm an advisor to a very, very early stage climate fund, so I see a lot of these startups, come and they're all interesting. Like I was just talking to a 4-person company with NSF funding that has developed autonomous underwater robots that can reseed seaweed beds and coral. Right now, you have to have divers go in. It's and seaweed is even more effective than mangroves. If any of you are biologists, mangroves are the single most powerful decarbonization plant in the world. Turns out seaweed even more so. So there's a lot going on. I would say I have no answer for the specifics there, but if you sort of start exploring the world of early stage climate innovation, you might find things that you feel are good investments. Sorry, I couldn't be more specific.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can.
Okay. I'd like you to speak about an everyday occurrence, which is to run into a person that just denies global warming. As a scientist, I can make a case, an economic case about all kind of actions, but these people seem to, that doesn't move them. And this is a serious problem because maybe 70% believe in it, but they won't do anything about it. Maybe that's the beauty of what your approach is, because I find it, I just can't keep my mouth shut. I mean, I can't just let someone say, oh, well, it's always been hot. I mean, we always had hot spells. So what do you do?
Thank you for asking that question. I think on this topic and others, trying to change the minds of people who are that far over is not a fruitful use of time. And I say that reluctantly myself because it's so frustrating. I find that maybe there are two things. One is really it is better to work with the 70% and to move them from belief to action. I don't know if that happens on individual levels or, like I said, local activism and community involvement seems more helpful. But I'll tell you a story about changing one person's mind. And I alluded to it earlier. I have a cousin lived in Florida. When I mentioned that this book had come out, it was a bestseller, and she's very deep into the space laser vaccine chip updates in your bloodstream stuff. So she goes, congratulations, what do I need to know? And honestly, that surprised me, right? So that was an opening to have that conversation. And I said, well, you need to know you should get out of Florida, but absent that, she goes, well, what's gonna happen? And I said, well, let's talk about sea level rise. And she was, okay. I said, well, when you put a pot of water on a stove, and if I hadn't worked on this book, I never, ever would have thought about how to explain this. Put a pot of water on a stove. She goes, okay. I said, turn on the stove. She goes, okay. What happens to the water? She goes, well, it heats up. I said, what happens when a volume heats up? And she worked at Lockheed Martin and had a graduate degree in that. So she at least knew to say, well, the molecules move around more. And I said, yes, and the water volume expands because the atoms are far apart. She said, right. I said, but where can it go? I said, because the walls of the pot don't let it go out. Kind of like the coastline of Florida. And she went, oh, I get it. She goes, I hadn't thought of that before. And I said, well, I'm not done. I said, drop a 10-pound bag of ice into the pot. And she goes, why? I said, because that's the Greenland ice sheet that just slid off of Greenland and has gone into the Atlantic Ocean and is the largest in the world. And I don't know if it changed her mind in a particular way, but she heard it, she respected it, she said, I hadn't thought of that before, and she became a more critical thinker about the information she was receiving. So I can only use that personal example as a way to have a conversation and to be very everyday about it, not talk about, huge data sets of historical change since industrialization began.
Thanks for a great talk. I want to go back to Bill Tittle's question about the climate change deniers. It seems to me that the whole climate change denialism has been co-opted by the right-wing deniers of everything else that is true out there. And so those people that live in that space get reinforcement from the TV stations they watch and the politicians they love and so on and so forth. And it's just, you say, well, why won't people, this is affecting them, there are floods and there are fires and there's smoke that we all inhale. So why don't people get it? Well, the culture wars, it really seem to be very powerful in terms of controlling people's minds. So here's an interesting fact. About a year and a half ago, we had another speaker whose name was Will Happer. He's a professor emeritus at Princeton. And he gave a really slick talk with great PowerPoints and a lot of formulas and charts and things. And he proved to us that climate change is not happening. It's not due to it might be happening, but it's just part of the natural cycles. And it's not due to human activity. And in particular, carbon dioxide is not a bad thing. It's a good thing because trees love carbon dioxide. The name of his talk was CO2, the gas of life. Okay, so we turn all these talks into YouTubes, and we'll turn yours into a YouTube. Joel does it these days, and as long as you're happy with the result, you'll give us the green light. So we put Will Happer's talk up there as a YouTube. Well, people can visit these YouTubes, and you can see the counts of people that attend and leave comments and that sort of thing. And each YouTube is sort of a blog because people can come and leave comments and then leave comments about other people's comments and so on and so forth. This is YouTube across the board, unless the owner of the YouTube turns off that capability. So we are happy if we get a few hundred visitors. And we think something's gone viral if we got a couple thousand. Will Happer's talk in a shorter period of time has had 245,000 views. I mean, for us, that's astronomical. And not only that, but the comments that started showing up, Joel and I get emails when there are comments and we see and it's had turned into a watering hole for the right-wing conspiracy theorists, and they would all show up and chat with each other on our YouTube. We finally had to turn off the comments. But, I mean, it's so dramatic. So we, Olgard, are responsible for some of the climate change denialism. I just want to let you know, guys.
You may not make everybody as unhappy as you thought. Herb, could you come up?
First, an observation. I read in the newspaper, I read in it recently that the severity of hurricanes making landfall in the U.S. has been declining, that the current one that hit the Carolinas so hard was just a little less severe than the one that hit New Jersey 10 years ago or so. I forget the name of it. And that in turn was a little bit less severe than Katrina. Now, that's unnoticed in the news except for articles like this. But that's just an observation. My question is, what are you doing about China, who is still building coal-burning plants, and India and Africa, the places where they're not doing what you're getting people to do here? I'm all in favor of improving the environment, but I hope to be a practical person. It doesn't do any good to fix 10% of the problem unless you got a plan to fix 100% of it.
I was unaware until now that I am responsible for saving the planet and the geopolitical order. I'll do my best.
That's the mission, isn't it?
Thank you for helping. No, it is. So the problem is, so what you're describing is a classic, it has been the classic problem in international relations around climate initiatives, which is the US is actually, even though it's the largest producer and exporter of fossil fuels, has been reducing its emissions regularly, and we're doing okay, right? So we're doing okay, so.
Our world will be okay. No, it won't.
We're an interconnected world, so there's that. But the developing world says, hey, why are you putting this burden on us? We still need to get our people up to a level of middle class existence and health, all that kind of stuff. And there's a logjam.
Yeah, but you have a different problem to solve if you're going to succeed. If your mission is to offset climate change, what's the best way to do it? To recycle plastics? No. The real way is to get China and India to make significant moves. And I don't hear anything about that. And we had a speaker about a dozen years ago who told us South Jersey would be underwater long ago. Not 20 years, but in 5 or 10.
That who would be underwater?
That New Jersey, southern New Jersey.
Yeah.
Well, never happened. AOC once said it was going to happen in 6 years. It never happened. So why is Quadraline going to disappear when the Maldives are still breaking water?
I'm not sure what to answer for all of this. The purpose of the book was to give people information, was to give people the ability to have conversations, not to lay out policy recommendations and policy changes. If any of us knew the answers, right? If anyone knew a single prime cause, a single prime action, we'd be hearing about it.
Is it stated in the book?
Yes.
See, yeah. I'm just wondering, and Herb kind of preempted some of the stuff I was going to ask you about. How do you get a consensus around the world to do the same thing? So it's very depressing because on a geopolitical basis, you're not going to get cooperation.
Right.
All right. So if we don't get that cooperation, and I mean, hypothetically, we're looking at something, if we have everybody's cooperation by X date, what's going to happen? Okay? If we do get everybody's cooperation, I don't know if I mixed that up. If we do get everybody's cooperation, then what's going to happen? So looking at both scenarios, we don't get buy-in or we do get buy-in, where do we wind up in 50 years?
So I can address that with high precision. If we don't address it, you're going to see levels of human migration and geopolitical instability that we have never seen before. About 20 years ago, not 20 years ago, 15 years ago, actually, Tom Friedman wrote a great piece in the Times in which he outlined how the Syrian civil war is the direct result of climate change. And it's a very compelling argument. It gets at the intersections of all of these kind of human systems as well as our physical systems. And so what we're going to see if we don't do anything is migration, places that are currently inhabitable becoming uninhabitable, more conflict, more war, shortened human lifespan. I don't know, we can make any list we want. It's not that we'll go extinct, it's just that the shape of the planet and the nature of human cooperation will change. If we do cooperate, I think it's harder to predict. I think what you'll see is following: more stability that relates to sort of our current structures, perhaps. But you'll also see something which is the result of an unprecedented level of innovation. Scientific innovation, technological innovation, our transportation systems will change, our food and agriculture systems will have changed. Our healthcare will have changed. We shouldn't forget that climate change is a contributor to pandemics appearing in parts of the world they wouldn't have appeared otherwise due to temperature and migration. So you'll see a little bit more stability and a lot more of the fruits of innovation that we probably haven't seen since the mid-19th century. That would be my best guess. It's a great question to think about.
Did you study effects of Netherlands? Did you study effects of Netherlands? How they fight bringing land and building dooms?
I think there is a piece. The almanac is 300 pages, so it's, I don't know, 100, 120 separate articles. I think we do have something on the ingenuity of the Dutch, really for centuries, in building a society in a country that lives below sea level. And other countries are now starting to study how they've done it.
I don't know if I should tell you that somebody told me I was going to die in the next 100 years, and I'm still here, so obviously they don't know what they're talking about. My question is about carbon capture. There's an effort to build a market for companies that capture carbon and sell them to companies that produce carbon through carbon credits. There is some of that going around. I'd like to know your opinion of the future of that market and the possibilities. And I don't want you to worry about the fact that my son is starting a new carbon capture company when you answer that.
Okay. And I'd like you not to think about the fact that I'm actually an advisor to a company developing a carbon fund. So, so there's two pieces to that in my answer. So my sense, and I haven't dived deeply into it, is that there's a lot of government stimulus and funding going into kind of industrial carbon capture. It's really a kind of like a gift to the fossil fuel industry, who can use some infrastructure. This is my understanding, so I'm not an expert in it. So sort of industrial carbon capture. Not clear that it actually is going to work yet, but there's a lot of money going in. Nature-based solutions, which is something I am more familiar with, are appearing all over the world. And that's where things like mangroves and seaweed and different cultivation practices actually result in taking carbon, out of the air. Related to that, by the way, our American love of eating red meat has a direct impact on climate because it causes two things: deforestation, as in the Amazon, and potentially in the Congo, which is the second largest rainforest, but also because cattle belch, people think otherwise, but they belch methane, and methane is a incredibly potent, though short-acting greenhouse gas. That's that. I'm a real believer in carbon credits, and it's a very controversial topic. But the basic idea is that that entities, whether it's businesses or communities, engaged in activities that are reducing carbon, generate a financial asset called this credit, which is a dollar value for a ton of carbon. There are, I think, national carbon credit systems, but there's the part that I'm most familiar with are the voluntary carbon credit markets. They are still emerging. They get criticized a lot. There's always a few bad actors, but our government, our economy has bad actors, but we don't say the whole thing is rotten. So it's still emerging. The technology for monitoring and verification is still developing, but I really think this is incredibly powerful because what you're doing is creating a new class of financial assets for poor communities that can now lift themselves up out of kind of rural poverty all around the world as the result of practicing sustainable decarbonization. I hope that answers.
Thank you. We have one more question, and then that'll be it.
First, a disclaimer, I haven't heard the book before I read about it in this presentation, but except for the Farmer's Almanac, which tends to predict the future, I've noticed that most almanacs are obsolete, the information in most almanacs are obsolete by the time they get published. So is there going to be a volume 2?
You're killing me. The whole point of this was to have annual or biannual updates. Welcome to the world of book publishing. They will not commit to doing it. And it's needed more than ever. Fortunately, when you have 2,500 people in a network involved in doing this who are all out there speaking, when you have the internet providing updates, even though the book itself may not appear in the 2025 edition, the work of the Almanac is very, very much continuing in a kind of a distributed, decentralized way. That's the best I can offer, but actually that sounds a little negative. It's not only it's the best I can offer, it's a good thing to offer to the world.
Well, Robert, clearly from the questions, you didn't put anybody to sleep. And great talk, great interaction. And what we do as our tradition is to present a certificate, which is up there and in front of here. And it is the certificate of appreciation. There's an orchid on there because in 1930, when we were founded, Summit was the orchid capital of the country. If you were an orchid aficionado, you ordered your orchids from the company in Summit. So there you go. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we also have one more thing that we always do, which is the Old Guard salute.